Hey there, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see everybody raring to go today. Hello.
Everybody, yeah.
Everybody. A lot of people.
Oops.
Uh,
Don't forget Facebook.
I know.
All right, good. Just checking.
Did you have a great birthday?
I did. Thank you. I had a good birthday with, well, I'll tell you. Well, no, I'll tell you now. No, listen, everybody who's had a birthday over the last few months has not had a birthday that they wanted to have. And pretty much everybody, that's pretty much everybody in my family, right? Or everybody's family. Anybody who's had, like I said, anybody who's had a birthday. But I will tell you, honestly, I had one thing that happened on my birthday, which I was most grateful for. And some of you know this, but I honestly thought I was going to lose my dad over this weekend. So I got that was one thing that I had, is I didn't have to worry about losing him on my birthday. So that was good. So that was close, I think, unfortunately. And again, I don't want to be suffering, but I also lost my mom the day before my birthday 3 years ago, and I didn't want to lose my dad the same time. I don't want to lose him at all, but anyways, yeah, it was a touch and go situation. So not to bring everything down to a screeching halt, but that was my birthday kind of wish, is that he was at peace and not suffer and not go yet.
But while we're waiting for more people, Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah.
While we're waiting for more people, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Doing Mary's genealogy, I came across King of Jerusalem. What was that in the medieval times?
That was an interesting role. For a very short period of time, there was a Christian king of Jerusalem during the Crusader period.
Mm-hmm.
Who did that refer? Who was
Fulk? F-U-L-K.
Yeah. So that was during the time of the Crusades. There were a few kings. I would refer you to some of the film versions, but the film versions of the Crusader movies have not been great. The last one being Kingdom of Heaven with Orlando Bloom. It was not a great movie, but it did cover an interesting period in time, and it was done by Ridley Scott, who always does good movies, but this was not one of them. I guess he doesn't always do good movies, but that was through Mary's genealogy, you said?
Yeah. It was King Henry II's grandfather.
So yeah, we're talking about like 1200s or something, or
1200s, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Mary, you've got roots that go back to some interesting people, right?
Absolutely.
We don't we don't have the most people, at least if their genealogy is primarily Jewish, you're not going to find royal.
I only go back 2 generations.
It's hard to find.
Yeah.
You could say you're related to King David, but it's probably true, but it would take a long time. There's some cool people in Jewish history, not a lot, but we have some cool people that people can trace themselves back to. Glocal of Hamelin, who wrote a autobiography during the Middle Ages, and interesting lady, and a lot of people have found they're related to her. But there aren't many people as Ashkenazi Jews that we can trace back. Some Sephardic Jews do, though. Some Sephardic Jews can trace themselves back to Maimonides or to rabbis from that period. But there's so few personages and so few records that it's hard to do that. So, it's not easy. So, everybody doing okay this summer morning? I think Rosemary's not
Is it
on.
summer? I didn't know that. My gosh, where have I been?
Blur's Day. It's Blur's Day.
Oh, good.
Thursday.
Blur day.
Not
I
mine.
like that. So we yeah, it's gonna be weird. It's gonna be
Is it Tuesday or April?
it's gonna be a weird it's gonna be a weird high it's gonna be a weird high holidays this year. If you think about it, it's always, you're always in the midst of whatever political or world events are going on. That's the holidays. But now, just to be able to remember what day it is or what month it is, and Rosh Hashanah is all about time. And Rosh Hashanah is all about the way we mark time and begin time, and the holiday itself is going to be, we're going to celebrate it, but it's very hard to celebrate a holiday that marks time when we've literally not been in a time that we can ever compare it to this time in our history. So yeah, I mean, time's not stood still, but it's definitely not transpired the way it normally does. And so how do you look back over a year when a good chunk of it by September, by then 6 months of it has been in a gray fog? So I'm sure
You're going to recycle the time sermon, the vampire one?
But I will tell you, I think about it every year about time, and obviously, yeah, I don't want to recycle talking about the same thing, but
You can't, because that cultural phenomenon has sailed.
Yes, but what's weird is that time, though, is always a theme for high holidays. It's always, it's always out there, and it's always, I mean, that's what to me, that's kind of what Shana is about. It was about our ancestors trying to make sense of time and how we do the same thing. But yeah, I can't. You can't. There's nothing that can be recycled this year because it's all different. It's all the rules are gone. So so Judith, I think you're going to be the reader. Right. You like to do that honor. The good news, some of you know, is that Rosemary's daughter is negative for COVID. She was her daughter-in-law, so she was very worried that she had it, but she's not positive. And today I read a report, and again, there's a lot of stuff going around, articles, and it's hard to know what are we supposed to believe? What are we paying attention to? What's the new report? But the report today said that masks do help you from getting the virus too. So I know. My wife said that's kind of
really.
But anticlimactic.
No, but they didn't have, I guess, the evidence. So, look, it was always an issue of protecting other people, but now it turns out it can also help you. So maybe that'll make people more.
I also heard this morning or read this morning that you're thinking they'll have a vaccine by mid to late fall.
Wow.
Not for us.
The rate. Well, you mean because the FDA, because we won't get approvals and stuff?
You won't get approvals until late fall. Yeah.
I won't get approvals until.
I'd be surprised if it's that quick. But maybe people will just demand it and say that we have to do it. So.
There'll be enough people who say no.
Yeah, but I'll get that vaccine. I'm not. I'm needless to say, I'll be at the front of the line if they can.
No, I think I'll be before you there, Rabbi.
I have 3 funerals in the next between now and next Friday. For
Jeez.
2 of them for sure were COVID related, and they both were women, by the way. They had complicating other factors, but 2 were women whose husbands didn't die or didn't get sick. I guess maybe they got sick. They didn't. I'm not even sure if both of them got sick, but they did have other health issues, and the other one might have had it, but they're not even gonna, I guess, test. So yeah, it's definitely going to be another couple tough months. The heat did not kill it. I just want you to.
Yeah.
There's still people.
Rabbi, before we start, can I just tell you, I loved the bluegrass music Friday night.
Yeah.
Did you? Oh, I'm so glad you did.
I didn't like the country. I didn't like the country one, but I loved.
I went too far. Okay. Well, listen, I appreciate it. I really like Nefesh Mountain, and
Yeah.
I also like Joe Buchanan, but I also have gotten more into country over the last couple of years. But I appreciate that, and I'm glad because it's you're never sure if other people like it. I think it's really cool. So Nefesh Mountain is who Diana is referring to, and I think they're doing some very, very, very cool Jewish music using mandolin and fiddles and the kinds of stuff that you'd see on a. So yeah, if you go back, they did 2 songs at the Slash Shabbat service, and they were really, really. We've been talking since the URJ convention in November. I met them at Chicago, and I said, we really got to, we've got to do some stuff together, and so we did finally, and there'll be some other cool people too, but I'm glad you enjoyed it, Diane, because I'm never sure whether my musical taste is too weird, but and again, I never know. I just try to put it out there, and hopefully people do enjoy it. So thank you. And again, it's another example of some stuff we've been able to do that it would have been expensive and difficult to get Nefesh Mountain just to come out to our synagogue, and we were able to do it through our television or whatever, the internet. So we're going to take a look, folks, at Joseph and his, well, not really and his dreams, and the Pharaoh's dreams, because today Joseph finally gets out of prison. It's 20 years that this young guy lost in prison. So if there was an Innocence Project back then, we could have gotten Joseph out, and maybe he would have not lost the ripe part of his life in prison. But we're going to look how he got out, and that is exactly where we left off. So hold it 1 second. Let me bring up our friends on our text, and here we go. And we are right here. We are in a I thought I highlighted it, but so we're 2 years have passed from the time that Joseph's dreams were the interpretation of the dreams of the butler and the baker. 2 years passed before the Pharaoh has his dream, and now the opportunity comes for him to talk about this guy. The issue we kind of read about last week, for those who were not here, was that there's actually an interpretation, a Midrash, that it was God who didn't allow the dream to come forward, or the butler to come forward to tell them about Joseph's dream. So he tried, but God wouldn't let him. This is an interesting idea, again, which kind of follows, as we talked about last week, this idea that this was a time that Joseph had to, this was the time that Joseph had to do what he did. So let's take a look at the different ways that this actually happens, because there are different midrashim on how this actually happens. And that's only one midrash, that Joseph's Joseph is actually prevented by God from coming forward, there's also this kind of idea that the butler just doesn't do what he's supposed to do, which is remember him, because maybe by remembering Joseph, he has to remind Pharaoh about his own time in prison, and why would he want to bring up something that's going to make the Pharaoh think about, oh yeah, didn't I put you in prison once? So it kind of makes sense that that wouldn't happen. So let's take a look at how this plays out. And Francine wants us to know that we can take zinc to boost our immunity. That is something that people have done over these last days. All right, so Joseph before Pharaoh.
Accursed are the wicked that never do a wholly good deed. The chief butler described Joseph contemptuously as a slave in order that it might be impossible for him to occupy a distinguished place at court. For it was a law upon the statute books of Egypt that a slave could never sit upon the throne as king, nor even put his foot in the stirrup of a horse. Pharaoh revoked the edict of death that he had issued against the wise men of Egypt, and he sent and called Joseph. He impressed care upon his messengers. They were not to excite and confuse Joseph and render him unfit to interpret the king's dream correctly. They brought him hastily out of the dungeon, but first Joseph, out of respect for the king, shaved himself and put on fresh raiment, which an angel brought him from paradise, and then he came unto Pharaoh.
All right, so what is that even about? So let's talk about that, because it is kind of strange that Joseph is wearing this special clothing that on the face of it seems to be something that he got out of Egypt, but what happens is that the Torah says, actually, let me just share it real quick. In Genesis chapter 40, it says, thereupon Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was rushed from the dungeon. He had his hair cut and changed his clothes, and he appeared before Pharaoh. Now, it says that he changed his clothes. Now, that seems obvious that if you're going from prison or the dungeon to Pharaoh, that you're not going to wear the same kind of clothes. But the rabbis interpreted this that he is, he's literally going to almost go through a complete transformation, and a miraculous transformation if he gets clothes that come from heaven. They're going to make him look more beautiful. Again, it's really important to point out that both the Bible and the Midrash are picking up on this connection that Joseph has to clothes. That when he wears certain clothes, this is an indication that something big is about to happen. That Joseph's clothes are part of the narrative. They move the story from the very beginning of Joseph's life, from the coat that he gets to this time when he's going to now appear before Pharaoh. Clothes are part of the story. And this isn't the last change of attire that's going to happen either. So keep that in mind, that this is part of the story of Joseph. Ripping the clothes being ripped, his clothes being ripped by Potiphar's wife. All of this is part of the story. It's an interesting kind of motif in the story that a lot of people don't get. The Torah definitely, it's intentional, and the Midrash picks up on it. So the fact that the rabbis say that these clothes are important because they're actually heavenly garments, a miracle, if you will, that Joseph has when he comes before Pharaoh. He's really, really special in that he's wearing angelic clothing. You didn't know that, did you? So anyways, there's this understanding of it. Okay.
The king, sitting upon the royal throne, arrayed in princely garments, clad with a golden ephod upon his breast, and the fine gold of the ephod sparkled, and the carbuncle, the ruby, and the emerald flamed like a torch, and all the precious stones set upon the king's head flashed like a blazing fire. And Joseph was greatly amazed at the appearance of the king. The throne upon which he sat was covered with gold and silver and with onyx stones, and it had 70 steps. If a prince or other distinguished person came to have an audience with the king, it was the custom for him to advance and mount to the 31st step of the throne, and the king would descend 36 steps and speak to him. But if one of the people came to have speech with the king, he ascended only to the 3rd step. And the king would come down 4 steps from his seat and address him from there. It was also the custom that one who knew all the 70 languages ascended the 70 steps of the throne to the top. But if a man knew only some of the 70 languages, he was permitted to ascend as many steps as he knew languages, whether there were many or few. And another custom of the Egyptians was that none could reign over them unless he was master of all the 70 languages.
Wow. So this is an interesting midrash which tells us about Egyptians, or about Pharaoh, that he is it's an awe-inspiring thing to come into contact with Pharaoh. And part of the legend that you have here in building up Pharaoh is that later on, Solomon in Midrash, we've seen it, we thought when we read about Solomon, that Solomon has a lot of the same stuff. He has this amazing throne that has animals on it that like actually attack people if they try to come up too close, or if they're not worthy to come up and to ascend to the steps. But this idea that the Pharaoh has somebody's got a lot of dog noise. As the Pharaoh's power is amplified by by this amazing throne and these steps that he's on, that he's above. And again, here's this idea that in order to actually come near the Pharaoh, the person had to be worthy, and that the Pharaoh knew 70 languages, which was considered to be kind of like being as smart as you. The smartest person was the person who knew these languages. It was weird because to some extent they valued knowledge based on how many languages you spoke. That was part of how people would assess someone's brilliance. It was by how many languages they knew. And I think we occasionally did that, up until most of us can barely speak one, let alone 2 or 3 languages. But we did used to talk about it, because again, we would say this person knew 7 languages, 8 languages. Universities, whether they were the Ivy Leagues here or the Oxbridge, schools in England. I mean, you had to learn languages, and it was still part of kind of the assessment of how brilliant somebody was by how many languages they knew. And I listen, I guess there's something to be said for language proficiency and the ability it is kind of a marvel to see people speaking so many different languages. But I guess we could say it's only one example of intelligence, but it is pretty astounding. And it's also pretty astounding to think that there were people who worked on, whether it was a cargo ship, going around the Mediterranean 400 years ago, or if it was if it was somebody who who worked in some of the caravans, or some of the ways that people traded, over the last 2,000 years. I mean, some people who maybe didn't even have any type of education would have been able to speak many languages just for business and for their ability to communicate to people in work. And today, most people, when they're doing international business, they speak English. People in China, have to learn English if they're gonna do business. People throughout Europe, Germany, all those countries, they all speak English. And it's not like it used to be. And most people in our country, we don't even teach language hardly anymore. So it's only one estimation of intelligence, but it was for a long time at least socially important to be able to speak different languages. So Pharaoh was one of those people, and according to tradition, you couldn't be Pharaoh unless you had the mastery of what at the time, again, throughout the Midrashic period, this idea that there were 70 languages, 70 nations that are mentioned in the book of Genesis. And again, it could be that you look at them as language groups, but it was considered to be, if you spoke 70 languages, you basically could talk to anybody in the world. So it's kind of, being able to communicate and being able to understand and have the ability to read or have the secrets of all these different kingdoms. And of course, Solomon also spoke to animals too. He knew the languages of the beasts. All right, so let's continue.
When Joseph came before the king, he bowed down to the ground, and he ascended to the third step, while the king sat upon the fourth from the top, and spoke with Joseph, saying, "Young man, my servant bears witness concerning you, that you are the best and most discerning person I can consult with. I pray you, vouchsafe unto me the same favors which you did bestow on this servant of mine, and tell me what events they are which the visions of my dreams foreshadow. I desire you to suppress nothing out of fear, nor shall you flatter me with lying words, or with words that please me. Tell me the truth, though it be sad and alarming."
Yeah, and remember, we just read a midrash, maybe again not from the same midrash, that Joseph had a reason to fear because, according to one version, the Pharaoh was killing people who were giving him bad interpretation. So there might have been a reason to fear. So here's what happens.
Joseph asked the king first how he knew that the interpretation given by the wise men of his country was not true. And Pharaoh replied, "I saw the dream and its interpretation together, and therefore they cannot make a fool of me." In his modesty, Joseph denied that he was as an adept at interpreting dreams. He said, "It is not in me, it is in the hand of God, and if it be the wish of God, he will permit me to announce tidings of peace to Pharaoh." And for such modesty, he was rewarded by sovereignty over Egypt. For the Lord does honor him that honors him. For the Lord does honor them that honor him. Thus was also Daniel rewarded for his speech to Nebuchadnezzar.
So again, they see in this story, and of course, Daniel was written much, much later, but this idea of a Jew going before the king, which we also have in Esther, in the Esther story in Persia, that this is a theme, which is the Jewish advisor, who is called in front of the king. And it actually was a motif and a theme that goes on all the way through the Middle Ages and through the Renaissance period, that there would be a Jewish advisor that the kings would turn to. And that was a role that sometimes saved lots of lives, being able to have access to power. And, it happened to some extent in a strange and weird way, as long as there was this kind of idea of as long as anti-Semitism was accepted, and it was accepted. I mean, let's face it, anti-Semitism, there was no, you weren't breaking any rule by being anti-Semitic through, much of human history. And as long as anti-Semitism existed, having a court Jew kind of went hand in hand with that reality. I mean, it was just part of the reality. Most people didn't like Jews, or Jews were marginalized, whatever else, but there was like one guy who would be the guy. And it was weird. I mean, sometimes that person had a chance to actually intervene, and sometimes they didn't. And sometimes it just was just this weird, but we have this one guy. And it's I mean, if you read the transcripts and what Richard Nixon said about Henry Kissinger, it was the same thing. It was that same mentality of, yeah, the Jew knows lots of stuff and he's really smart, but he's still a Jew. And it's really weird that people can maintain this, and they did. I mean, it's just a fact. They maintain this anti-Semitism, but at the same time, they'd have like the guy that was their go-to star. And I mean, if you look at the theme of Pharaoh and Joseph, which is the first real version of this story, it arguably still exists and could still exist in some places. So it was part and parcel of anti-Semitism was there was a token Jew who people would keep around for advice. So
Midrash says that Pharaoh not only had the dream, but also interpreted the dream.
Oh yeah, thank
Is
you.
he looking for this corroboration?
Yeah, so Reverend Lynn, so this is this theme that we have here, which is that Pharaoh knows what his dream already means. He's looking really to find somebody who can help him implement what the truth that he knows already. And the fact that nobody can get to it kind of is an interesting idea here, which is kind of like takes a step beyond the text, which I think is a powerful idea, which is that oftentimes we know what we're supposed to do. We know, and oftentimes it's something we don't want to do, and we don't like what we hear. We don't like what we've heard, but we need to have somebody corroborate it. In order for us to actually do what we need to do, we need somebody else to tell us, yeah, this is what you got to do. Because we know it. We just don't want to say it. We don't want to admit the truth. And so we need to have somebody come back behind us and say, yeah, but this is what you need to do. So up until now, no one's done that to Pharaoh. No one has done that. And where this comes from it's hinted to in the Torah. It's hinted to there because, well, I think we got right to it. So let's just take a look at the Torah. So first we have the actual line of the Torah. Joseph said to Pharaoh, "It's not me. God will see to Pharaoh's welfare," and not that Pharaoh. God's going to tell you what your dream means, but God will answer you. The word is Ya'aneh et Shalom Pharaoh, that God will see to your peace, will see to your wholeness. And welfare is a good translation, but that's the translation of the word shalom there. So then Pharaoh tells him the dream, and we'll see the Midrash on this too. But Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 healthy cows are 7 years, and the 7 healthy ears are 7 years. It's the same dream. The 7 lean and ugly cows that followed are 7 years, as are also the 7 empty ears scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I have told Pharaoh. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. So Joseph says, God has told you what's going to happen. Not me, told you, which is really a great lesson on how to get through to people. Not, let me tell you, God, you already know. God's told you. Immediately ahead are 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt. After them will be 7 years of famine, and all the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten as the land is ravaged by famine. No trace of the abundance will be left in the land because of the famine thereafter, for it will be very severe. As for Pharaoh having had the same dream twice, it means the matter has been determined by God, and that God will soon carry it out. So it's not a possibility. It's not maybe this will happen. You had the dream twice. It's going to happen. And then he goes, and this is Joseph, accordingly let Pharaoh find a man of discernment and wisdom and set him over the land of Egypt, and let Pharaoh take steps to appoint overseers of the land to organize the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty. Let all the food of these good years that are coming be gathered, and let the grain be collected under Pharaoh's authority as food to be stored in the cities. Let the food be a reserve for the land of the 7 years of famine, which will come upon Egypt, so the land may not perish in famine. The plan pleased Pharaoh and all his courtiers. And Pharaoh said to his courtiers, could we find another like him a man in whom is the Spirit of God. And so, of course, then Pharaoh says, since God has let you know all this, you're the man. Notice again, in the Torah, Joseph goes right from interpreting and telling him what's in the dream to, I got to tell you, you've got to do something about it. So Joseph doesn't just interpret the dream. Joseph actually tells Pharaoh what to do because of the dream. And so the rabbis pick up on the fact that because Joseph has already taken a step to rectify the problem, how to address the problem, that Pharaoh also already knew what the dream was. What Joseph did is Joseph told him what his dream was, and that was the secret. That was the prize, because Pharaoh knew it too. So because Pharaoh is a smart man and is wise on his own, he did understand it. What he was looking was really for verification. It's really a test to see who's right, who is the person who should be able to do this. So that's what the rabbis are picking up on. They're picking up on it already jumps right ahead to I'm going to fix it. Let me, and again, Joseph doesn't say, let me be the person, but it's pretty obvious. Joseph doesn't get a job interpreting Pharaoh's dreams. Joseph is Pharaoh's number one advisor. He's number two in the country. It's not because he interpreted the dreams to some extent. It's because he verified Pharaoh's dream and interpretation that he knew and then fixed it. So it's not about just being good at interpreting dreams or saying dreams. That's not it. So that's the way the rabbis kind of like almost skip over it. So let us
also by Pharaoh knowing the dream interpretation, he can weed out a yes man.
Yeah, and that's what the rabbis did. They put into Pharaoh the words, "Don't tell me what I want to hear," and so he knows the answer. This is a test to see again who's the person who's going to do it. So that's really what the rabbis are picking up on. That's why we kind of skipped ahead. So I want to show you. It's the Torah. The Torah gives us that. The Torah. Joseph doesn't there's no pause between Joseph saying, this is what the dream means. Now, what do you think we should do? He doesn't say that. He goes right into, this is what you have to do. So it's not just an interpretation. Joseph immediately is trying to fix and solve the problem and saying, okay, this is how we have to respond to this. So this is taking the information. Again, we're assuming, the Bible assumes that, again, God does these things. God will give people a dream that, foretells the future. And so that's not the point. The point isn't the dream really. It's about what do you do when you know you're in this situation. It's really about dealing with how do you fix something? How are you going to respond to this challenge? Now, again, it's a challenge that hasn't materialized yet. This is actually, a miracle that we know the future. They know the future. But it doesn't matter if you know the future. You can be a great prognosticator, but if you don't know how to implement and adapt to the change that you just said, what difference does it make? And so the rabbis kind of point out, it doesn't matter if you have some amazing gift to know the future. If you can't respond to it, it's nothing. It means absolutely nothing. It just means you're a fortune teller. So this is really, again, the interesting point of what the story actually teaches us. And the Torah sets that up. The Torah it's not the Midrash just giving us a whole new spin. There are some interesting spins here that we didn't get in the Torah. The Midrash will never stop from giving us some interesting stories that, we don't have, but in the Torah. Here we go.
There is a God in heaven that reveals secrets. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but to the intent that the interpretation may be made known to the king, that you may know the thoughts of your heart. Then Pharaoh began to tell his dream, only he omitted some points and narrated others inaccurately, in order that he might test the vaunted powers of Joseph. But the youth corrected him and pieced the dreams together exactly as they had visited Pharaoh in the night. And the king was greatly amazed. Joseph was able to accomplish this feat because he had dreamed the same dream as Pharaoh at the same time as he. Thereupon Pharaoh retold his dreams with all details and circumstances, and precisely as he had seen them in his sleep, except that he left out the word Nile in the description of the 7 lean kine, because this river was worshipped by the Egyptians, and he hesitated to say that aught that is evil had come from his God.
Oh, so the rabbis point out that when Pharaoh retells the dreams, they're basically the same, but there is a word missing, which is the Nile. So the rabbis interpret that as the Pharaoh didn't want to say the Nile because he didn't want to admit that his gods, the gods that he worshipped, were punishing him. And so by saying the Nile, he was saying that Nile was punishing him, and he didn't want to say that. Okay, so the rabbis are pointing out that the dreams are basically the same. The way the Bible retells the dream, it's almost exactly the same. But the rabbis point out that there's something that we didn't get in the Torah, which they say that the Pharaoh at first doesn't tell him the dream exactly the way it happened because he wants to test Joseph. He wants to see whether Joseph really has this power. And so he doesn't tell him the dream. But the Midrash tells us that Joseph knew the dream because he had the dream at the same time. So that's part of, again, how miraculous this was that Joseph didn't just interpret the dream. Joseph had the dream the same time as Pharaoh did. They were dreaming it at the same time. So Pharaoh couldn't lie. He couldn't get away with it because Joseph knew what was there. And so this further proves Joseph's powers. Joseph's powers are so good. Not only did he have the dream, which means that's a miracle, but that he proves that. He proves that by, again, Pharaoh proves not only is he not looking for a yes man, he's actually proving that Joseph has these powers that clearly are miraculous, because you couldn't have the same dream that somebody else is having unless it was a miracle. So that's Joseph's powers are even more than you thought. But again, there's also just the bottom line of the Midrash that no, Joseph's powers are really, he knows how to fix things. So here we go.
Now Joseph proceeded to give the king the true interpretation of the 2 dreams. They were both a revelation concerning the 7 good years impending and the 7 years of famine to follow them. In reality, it had been the purpose of God to bring a famine of 42 years duration to Egypt, but only 2 years of this distressful period were inflicted upon the land, for the sake of the blessing of Jacob when he came to Egypt in the 2nd year of the famine. The other 40 years fell upon the land at the time of the prophet Ezekiel.
All right. Well, where do we even get this from? We get this from this idea that Egypt was being punished. Egypt was being punished, and that the punishment would actually have been 6 times longer than the original 7 years. So there's a couple things that go on here. The first is it's telling us that the Egyptians didn't even get the 7 years. That once Jacob came down to Egypt, the famine ended. But so it was never as bad as it could have been for Egypt, and that was on merit of Jacob, which is strange in a way because Jacob had to deal with the famine too when he was in the land of Israel. I mean, what would have happened if he hadn't come down to Egypt? And it begs the question, doesn't Jacob have to come down to Egypt? But they point out that there's a famine in Egypt during the time of Ezekiel, which lasts for 40 years. So what this does in a kind of a roundabout way is it tells us that Egypt did get their 42 years of famine, just got broken up by a long period of time, by the way, because Ezekiel, lives 700 years later. But Ezekiel, during his time, this famine affects Egypt, and it's a long famine. It's a long drought, and and it is punishment that the Egyptians essentially had due to them for a long time, and that they finally get it. So famine happens during the time of Ezekiel, and the way that the rabbis interpret it is that it was due to them, the Egyptians. But again, this kind of weird thing they threw out, that the famine didn't last in Egypt as long as it was supposed to. So Joseph ends up really, really helping out, and the process, the institution of this savings that he puts in, ends up being even more kind of beneficial, because they don't even need it as much as they thought. So he really, it turns into a great blessing. But again, this is a midrash on these 42 years of famine that Egypt is going to have. So more of Joseph's dream interpretation, which isn't in the Torah.
Joseph did more than merely interpret the dreams. When the king gave voice to doubts concerning the interpretation, he told him signs and tokens. He said, "Let this be a sign to you that my words are true and my advice is excellent. Your wife, who is sitting upon the birth stool at this moment, will bring forth a son, and you will rejoice over him. But in the midst of your joy, the sad tidings will be told to you of the death of your older son, who was born to you but 2 years ago. And you must need find consolation for the loss of the one in the birth of the other." Scarcely had Joseph withdrawn from the presence of the king when the report of the birth of a son was brought to Pharaoh, and soon after also the report of the death of his firstborn, who had suddenly dropped to the floor and passed away. Thereupon he sent for all the grandees of his realm and all his servants, and he spoke to them, saying, "You have heard the words of the Hebrew, and you have seen the signs which he foretold were accomplished. And I also know that he has interpreted the dream truly. Advise me now how the land may be saved from the ravages of the famine. Look hither and thither, whether you can find a man of wisdom and understanding, whom I may set over the land, for I am convinced that the land can be saved only if we heed the counsel of the Hebrew." The grandees and the princes admitted that safety could be secured only by adhering to the advice given by Joseph, and they proposed that the king, in his sagacity, choose a man who he considered equal to the great task. Thereupon Joseph said, "If we traversed and searched the earth from end to end, we could find none such as Joseph, a man in whom is the Spirit of God. If you think well thereof, I will set him over the land which he has saved by his wisdom."
Yep. So the Midrash says that not only did he interpret dreams, but then he also told the Pharaoh of some things that were about to happen in his own house. And once they happened, there was no doubt that Joseph was different. And so he proves it. Joseph, again, lets this stuff happen. Now, why do we even have this midrash? I mean, why do we have a story of Joseph interpreting and then further on showing these signs, these foretelling the future? Well, there's a theme, and obviously in the Torah, which is the death of Pharaoh's firstborn. So here you have a death of a firstborn, which is in itself a foretelling or a foreshadowing of what happens during the Exodus. So it's a weird kind of foreshadow of the death of Pharaoh's firstborn. It happens during Joseph's time. I mean, Pharaoh doesn't seem to be overly wrought by losing a son in this matter, but but it seems as though this was a necessity for Joseph to prove himself. So you'd think, like, isn't it enough that he just did this, that he told Pharaoh his dreams, and the Pharaoh, couldn't even trick him into being wrong? No, because there's another issue here, which is it's not just Pharaoh that has to be convinced. It is the rest of Egypt that has to be convinced. Here we go.
The astrologers who were his counselors demurred, saying, "A slave, one whom his present owner has acquired for 20 pieces of silver, you propose to set over us as master?" But Pharaoh maintained that Joseph was not only a freeborn man beyond the peradventure of a doubt, but also the scion of a noble family.
Yeah.
However, the princes of Pharaoh were not silenced. They continued to give utterance to their opposition to Joseph, saying, "Do you not remember the immutable law of the Egyptians, that none may serve as king or as viceroy unless he speaks all the languages of men? And this Hebrew knows none but his own tongue. And how were it possible that a man should rule over us who could not even speak the language of our land? Send and have him fetched hither, and examine him in respect to all the things a ruler should know and have, and then decide as seems wise in your sight."
Wow. So how can you have this guy who's not even he's not an Egyptian. He doesn't even know our language, which, by the way, you'd think that after living in Egypt for 20 years, that Joseph would have picked up the language. But again, this issue of languages and having these, the ability to speak a lot of languages was something that would have, should have been important and would have impressed the Egyptians. Again, this country bumpkin from Canaan is going to be the person that they put in charge of their country. Because even if he's freeborn, even if he was sold into slavery, even if that part is true, what does this kid know? He's from Canaan, and he doesn't know the languages. He doesn't speak all these languages. By the way, this is an interesting issue of languages in Egypt, because at least during the time of, later on during the time of Cleopatra, I mean, we assume that like Cleopatra would have known Egyptian, would have known Greek, would have known Latin. I mean, that's just one woman who would have had to rule the country and speak just to the people that we know from documentation that she was close to, whether it was Julius Caesar. We know she spoke Greek because her family spoke Greek. They were part of the Greek Egyptian Ptolemaic rulers. And she would have spoken Egyptian Demotic to the servants and to the people, to her country. And what's interesting is when we found the Rosetta Stone, the thing that broke the code to understanding the hieroglyphics of ancient Egypt, the Rosetta Stone was a text that was written in, and because it had all three, it was the code. We were able to break it. It was written in Greek. It was written in Demotic, which is the Egyptian language of the time, and it was written in hieroglyphics. And because of those three languages being on the same sheet, we were able to finally stone. We were able to translate the hieroglyphics. So knowing different languages was really, really quite important. And during the rabbinic period, most of them spoke Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek, maybe Latin too. Most of them spoke 4 languages at least, probably 4 languages. I don't know if say at least, but this would have been an important issue. And by the way, most of us who have Ashkenazi heritage, most of our family members who lived in Poland or Russia, Austria, 3 or 4 generations ago spoke Yiddish. Some spoke Hebrew. Some spoke German or Polish or Russian. I like to tell the story of how my great-grandmother knew 8 languages, and that was 100 years ago. She knew 8 languages, and I, like I said, I barely know 2. So it's kind of an admission of how little we were. And by the way, I never kind of believed that and I've actually found some of my grandma, when I inherited my grandmother's stuff, her mother, my great grandmother, I have books that she wrote in these different languages. I mean, she actually, part of me didn't believe it. And then I saw these books that she had, and they were written in, German, Yiddish, Estonian, Russian. I mean, I found 4 for sure. So, and I know she spoke English because she lived here for a good chunk of her life, for a good 50 years, 60 years of her life. Anyways, how's Joseph going to learn these languages? He is going to get some help. Here's what happens.
Pharaoh yielded. He promised to do as they wished, and he appointed the following day as the time for examining Joseph, who had returned to his prison in the meantime. For, on account of his wife, his master feared to have him stay in his house. During the night, Gabriel appeared to Joseph and taught him all the 70 languages, and he acquired them quickly after the angel had changed his name from Joseph to Yehoseph. The next morning, when he came into the presence of Pharaoh and the nobles of the kingdom, inasmuch as he knew every one of the 70 languages, he mounted all the steps of the royal throne until he reached the 70th, the highest, upon which sat the king. And Pharaoh and his princes rejoiced that Joseph fulfilled all the requirements needed by one that was to rule over Egypt. The king said to Joseph, "You did give me the counsel to look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt, that he may in his wisdom save the land from the famine. As God has showed you all this, and as you are master of all the languages of the world, there is none so discreet and wise as you. You shall therefore be the second in the land after Pharaoh, and according to your word shall all my people go in and go out. My princes and my servants shall receive their monthly appanage from you. Before you the people shall prostrate themselves. Only in the throne will I be greater than you."
Wow. So there's Joseph's promotion. So in order to get the promotion, he has to prove he knows 70 languages. He gets angelic help here too, because Gabriel appeared to him and teaches him the languages in one night. He gives him a crash course in the 70 languages of man, so that he's ready when he goes in front of the Pharaoh and goes up the throne, that he's able to mount the steps of the throne and able to show that he knows the languages. And according to this is again cause for celebration, that this is a great moment when Joseph is able to take his role. If we look at what the Torah says, it says, "You shall be in charge of my court, and by your command shall all my people be directed. Only with respect to the throne shall I be superior to you." Those words are literally in the Torah. Pharaoh further said to Joseph, "See, I put you in charge of all the land of Egypt." And removing his signet ring from his hand, Pharaoh put it on Joseph's hand. So he gets the signet ring. But wait,
And then he gets
there's
new clothes.
more. There's more.
He gets a uniform.
He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck. And he had him ride in the chariot of his second in command. And they cried before him, Abrek, which means bow. Abrek, which is similar to the word Baruch, which means to bow. Bless actually means also bow. Thus he placed them over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, yet without you no one shall lift up a hand or foot in the land of Egypt. And then it says, Pharaoh then gave Joseph the name Zaphanath Paneah, and he gave for him the wife Osnat, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. Thus Joseph emerged in charge of the land of land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Leaving Pharaoh's presence, Joseph traveled all the land, throughout all the land of Egypt. So that is Joseph's promotion. It comes with it a new set of clothes and a wife. So the question of what happens now with Joseph in charge is where the Midrash is going to take us now. So think about this as we get into the Midrash version. Joseph is now in charge of Egypt. Joseph has literally now been given command. Only Pharaoh is above him, but in terms of what Joseph can do, he can do, again, basically anything that Pharaoh would have done, now he can do. And this is, again, a motif that we have in the story of Persia with Ahasuerus, who eventually promotes Mordecai and gives him, he gave Haman a signet ring, and now he gives the signet ring after he kills Haman to Mordecai. So these themes of signet rings and rulers, the rulers kind of basically, passing off authority to their assistant. This is a theme that we get in Joseph, and continues on later in the Bible as well. So let's look how the Midrash now takes hold of these stories. So here we go.
Hold on. The ruler of Egypt. Got it. Now Joseph reaped the harvest of his virtues, and according to the measure of his merits, God granted him reward. The mouth that refused the kiss of unlawful passion and sin received the kiss of homage from the people. The neck that did not bow itself to sin was adorned with the gold chain that Pharaoh put upon it. The hands that did not touch sin wore the signet ring that Pharaoh took from his own hand and put on Joseph's. The body that did not come in contact with sin was arrayed in vestures of byssus. The feet that made no steps in the direction of sin reposed in the royal chariot, and the thoughts that kept themselves undefiled by sin were proclaimed as wisdom.
Yep. So basically, when you keep your body pure, you are rewarded, according to this, by getting good stuff for your body. So it's measure for measure. So
what does that word mean?
Byssus is sometimes called sea silk. It's used by the, I'm looking it up right now, it's actually mussels that are woven, they're filaments secreted by the species of bivalve mollusks that they basically weave these things into fabric, which sounds like it would be pretty darn expensive. Wow. So there you go. It's extremely rare. It was produced in the Mediterranean region until the early 20th century. There you go. You learned something about sea silk today. So he gets all this stuff because his body was not in any way demeaned and degraded by passion. So, but wait, there's more.
Joseph was installed in his high position and invested with the insignia of his office with solemn ceremony. The king took off his signet ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in princely apparel, and set a gold crown upon his head, and laid a gold chain about his neck. Then he commanded his servants to make Joseph to ride in his second chariot, which went by the side of the chariot wherein sat the king. And he also made him to ride upon great and strong horses of the king's horses, and his servants conducted him through the streets of the city of Egypt. Musicians, no less than 1,000 striking cymbals and 1,000 blowing flutes, and 5,000 men with drawn swords gleaming in the air formed the vanguard. 20,000 of the king's grandees, girt with gold embroidered leather belts, marched at the right of Joseph, and as many at the left of him. The women and the maidens of the nobility looked out of the windows to gaze upon Joseph's beauty, and they poured down chains upon him and rings and jewels, that he might but direct his eyes towards them. Yet he did not look up, and as a reward God made him proof against the evil eye, nor has it ever had the power of inflicting harm upon any of his descendants. Servants of the king preceded him and followed him, burnt incense upon his path and cassia, and all manner of sweet spices, and strewed myrrh and aloes wherever he went. 20 heralds walked before him, and they proclaimed, "This is the man whom the king has chosen to be the second after him. All the affairs of state will be administered by him, and whoever resists his commands or refuses to bow down to the ground before him, he will die the death of the rebel against the king and the king's deputy."
Yep. So Joseph going through the streets now is it's a scene out of Thousand and One Night, Arabian Nights, right? It's that thing you see in Aladdin, with all the excitement. It actually sounds a little bit like the story of Mordecai, right? So definitely affected by that. It seems to be a little bit less. Well, I mean, we don't know exactly what life was like in ancient Egypt, and we still are kind of piecing it together by what the descriptions are in some of those stories that we have, like Scheherazade stories. But it's kind of based on that those Persian court stories of what life would have been like. So this is the same types of descriptions of this type of celebration, with music, with flowers and noises and all these kinds of things going on. So again, Joseph is showing his modesty and his humility with what's happening here. So there's this interesting line that we have here, which is that because Joseph didn't succumb to this attention, that his descendants will also not be affected by the evil eye. So what are they talking about here? Joseph himself becomes proof or a protection, if you will, against the evil eye, and that his descendants won't be able to either be hurt by the evil eye. So what is the evil eye? What is it? Somebody, anybody want to hit me with what the evil eye is? Anybody? That's why we say Cain Ahora. Cain Ein Hara, no evil eye. So in Yiddish we say Cain Ahora, which is the kind of the fast way of saying no evil eye. Right? So evil eye, what is it? Anybody? You want to jump in with what the evil eye is? No?
Jesus?
No.
Christians?
Evil eye is our tradition is that if you have lots of stuff, if you're doing well, people start looking at you and wanting your stuff.
Right.
That is the Ein Hara. It is jealousy which creates destruction on you, because you are inviting people to have negative energy directed at you because they want to take your stuff, or they don't want you to have that stuff. So, what does this mean? It means that when something good happens to you, when you have a baby or grandbaby,
Something bad is bound to happen to balance it out.
Yeah, and you're getting people looking at your stuff and saying, I want their stuff, and I don't want them to have their stuff, that stuff. And what that does is it creates negative energy, which means that you get that stuff taken away. And so when somebody says Cain Ahora after saying something good, that's when you say Cain Ahora. You don't say Cain Ahora when something bad happens. You say when something good happens. You say, my daughter just had a baby, Cain Ahora, no evil eye, because you're bragging, but you don't want somebody who you just bragged to think, oh, what a jerk. Her daughter just had a kid. My daughter can't have a kid. I wish she couldn't have a kid. So it's kind of this admission that people have the ability to create power through jealousy over your stuff, over your good things. So rather than, okay, well, part of this is actually a good thing, which is you're not supposed to brag about stuff. There's a balance, obviously, because if people are always afraid that the good things they have in life are going to get taken away from them, they're always kind of not happy, and they're always on edge, and there's no celebration or appreciation, because people are just worried that it's going to get taken away from them. So look, there's a good side of it, which it keeps people humble and modest, and it makes people not go around bragging and, drive around in a Lamborghini, which literally you're saying, if you're driving around in a car like that, look at me and look how much stuff I have. And you're inviting the evil eye. So there are a lot of people today continuing in the Jewish community to this moment who will not live a very materialistic life. And again, there are obviously examples of counter that, which are people who don't care about the evil eye. There are people who take it seriously, or the tradition has become manifest so that they don't even know why they do it anymore, where they're very wealthy, but they don't live ostentatious lives because they do believe that by doing so, or the tradition was, by doing so, you're going to bring calamity on yourself because you're going to get people jealous of you and you'll lose it. So it's better to live a modest life and not bring attention to it. So don't drive around in flashy cars. Don't live ostentatious life, because you're going to get it taken away by having everyone look at you with an evil eye. This is the fear. And so by Joseph doing what he does, he's teaching us how to avoid getting the evil eye. And that if you're like Joseph, if you behave like Joseph, you will be like him as one of Joseph's descendants, of having the evil eye have no power over you. The evil eye will have no power over you. Okay? This was a big deal. This was a big deal. And so Joseph would be invoked by our ancestors to keep away the evil eye. How would Joseph be used? For that purpose. If people said, Joseph, protect me, that's what they were talking about. They were talking about Joseph's power against the evil eye, symbolically. So that's why people use a hamsa to protect against the evil eye. That's one of the symbols. Also, the eye itself, the blue eye, which counters the evil eye that people would give when they looked at your stuff. So that blue eye that's used in artwork and in motifs, that's also the Joseph / evil eye protection that people have. So having Joseph or invoking Joseph would be, again, a way of protecting against the evil eye. And this was a big deal. All right, so what happens when Joseph goes around town? Here we go.
Down a little bit.
We're here, without delay.
Yes, without delay, the people prostrated themselves. Hang on. I can't get that line. Without delay, the people prostrated themselves and they cried, "Long live the king, and long live the deputy of the king." And Joseph looked down from his horse upon the people and their exultation, exclaimed, his eyes directed heavenward, "The Lord raises up the poor out of the dust and lifts up the needy from the dunghill. O Lord of hosts, blessed is the man that trusts in you." After Joseph, accompanied by Pharaoh's officers and princes, had journeyed through the whole city of Egypt and viewed all there was therein, he returned to the king on the selfsame day. And the king gave him fields and vineyards as a present, and also 3,000 talents of silver, and 1,000 talents of gold, and onyx stones, and bdellium, and many other costly things. The king commanded, moreover, that every Egyptian give Joseph a gift, else he would be put to death. A platform was erected in the open street, and there all deposited their presents, and among the things were many of gold and silver, as well as precious stones, carried there by the people and also the grandees, for they saw that Joseph enjoyed the favor of the king. Furthermore, Joseph received 100 slaves from Pharaoh, and they were to do all his bidding, and he himself acquired many more, for he resided in a spacious palace. 3 years it took to build. Special magnificence was lavished upon the hall of state, which was his audience chamber, and upon the throne fashioned of gold and silver and inlaid with precious stones whereon there was a representation of the whole land of Egypt and of the river Nile. And as Joseph multiplied in riches, so he increased also in wisdom. For God added to his wisdom that all might love and honor him. Pharaoh called him Zaphenat Paneah, he who can reveal secret things with ease, and rejoices the heart of man therewith. Each letter of the name, Zaphenat Paneah, has a meaning too. The first, Sadi, stands for Sofer, seer. Pe for Podeh, redeemer. Nun for Navi, prophet. Tav for Tomek, supporter. Pe for Poter, interpreter of dreams. Ayin for Arum, clever. Nun for Navon, discreet. And Chet for Chacham, wise.
Yeah. So, as we read, Pharaoh gave Joseph a new name, an Egyptian name. The rabbis are a little upset about that, I guess, because they basically said that the name itself is actually code for Hebrew words. So look at the different words that are part of his name. Each letter stands for a different thing that he is or does. So the name is actually a Hebrew code. Don't read it as an Egyptian word. Read it as a Hebrew, as an acronym for the Hebrew, these Hebrew words. So that's why he has this name. So Pharaoh gave it to him, but Pharaoh gave it to him, maybe not realizing what he actually did was gave him the name that, again, contains all these wonderful things that he did. So it's an interpretation of why does he have this new name. It also tells us, of course, of how much Joseph got when he became so powerful. So people had to give him gifts. He got slaves, which of course is ironic because he was a slave and now he has all these slaves. And that this man who had nothing, who was sold for a bag of silver, now has more silver and gold than he could ever use. So the Bible tells us he becomes powerful, but the Midrash goes into this great description of how much he does have. And there is this sense that it's kind of what he deserved all along. He finally gets what's coming to him, and it comes in a avalanche of success. He gets everything. He gets everything and more that he deserved. So this is the Torah hints at it. The Midrash goes even further in the description of it. Again, this palace that he has that takes 3 years to build. How much he gets. But of course, the greatest thing that he gets is his wife, Osanat. Now, Osanat doesn't sound like a very pretty name in English, but Asenath or Osnat actually has become a more popular Hebrew name in Israel over the last couple of generations. It was not a popular Hebrew name for most of the last 2,000 years of Jewish history because essentially it's not a Hebrew name. It's an Egyptian name. But who is Osnat? We talked about it before, and now we're going to have the Midrash telling us again who Osnat is. Who could possibly be worthy of Joseph as a wife?
The name of Joseph's wife pointed to her history in the same way. Osnat was the daughter of Dinah and Hamor, but she was abandoned at the borders of Egypt only that people might know who she was. Jacob engraved the story of her parentage and her birth upon a gold plate fastened around her neck. The day on which Osnat was exposed, Potiphar went walking with his servants near the city wall, and they heard the voice of a child. At the captain's bidding, they brought the baby to him, and when he read her history from the gold plate, he determined to adopt her. He took her home with him and raised her as his daughter. The Aleph in Osnat stands for On, where Potiphar was priest. The Samech for Sitira, hidden, for she was kept concealed on account of her extraordinary beauty. The Nun for Nohemet, for she wept and entreated that she might be delivered from the house of the heathen Potiphar, and the Tav for Tamah, the perfect one, on account of her pious, perfect deeds.
So here's the story, what we have of Osnat. We don't know anything about her in the Bible other than she's the daughter of Potiphar, who's a priest of On, of the city of On. Now, the rabbis interpret this that it's the same person, that Potiphar and Potiphar are the same person. Same person. Not necessarily. The Torah doesn't say that. It's a slightly different name. Could be again the same, but doesn't seem like it's necessarily the same. And Potiphar would have been a common Egyptian name. It didn't have to be the same person. But at least according to the Midrash further, it's not his daughter anyways. It's actually Joseph's niece. Joseph's sister Dinah, or half-sister Dinah, had a child, according to the Midrash, with Shechem, actually. It's interesting that it says Hamor, but it's actually Shechem, the daughter of Hamor. The son of Hamor. That this is a child that is essentially at least half Jewish or half Israelite, to be more precise. That she is, her lineage is actually, she's part of our family. So here's a great story that this woman, this amazing lady, Osnat, is actually hidden, and her real story is one of very much like Moses, in that she's raised in Egypt, not really kind of being Egyptian, not maybe knowing her story, but Potiphar knew the story. There's this gold tablet on her which told him where she came from, and here she was kind of waiting all along for Joseph and to be married to him. So she would have been younger than Joseph. How much younger?
20 years, 15 years.
A good 15 years younger. But if Joseph was in Egypt for 20 years by this point, she's not a kid when she marries him. She would have been, in her 20s, right? So it's not, we're not sure how much before Joseph got taken to Egypt, the story of Dinah happened, the rape story happened, but it happens in chapter 34 and Joseph gets taken in chapter 37. It's close by. It doesn't say how much time elapsed. But again, Joseph could have been a young man of, let's say, 13, 14 when this niece was born. So completely legal, by the way, by Jewish law for somebody to marry their niece. And the rabbis...
She's kind of a half niece or a quarter niece or something.
Yes. But as far as anything else that goes for this, I want to make the point that for the rabbis, marrying her would be far, in their minds, far more acceptable than him marrying the daughter of an Egyptian priest. I find it interesting because I like the idea that he marries the daughter of an Egyptian priest, because it shows that from the biblical standpoint, that when these patriarchs got married, they didn't necessarily find a Hebrew to marry, and yet their kids were accepted as part of the community. So yeah, if Osnat is really Dinah's daughter, then there's no intermarriage. But how much more inspiring, relevant, what kind of lesson do we get if Joseph's kids, Ephraim and Manasseh, are actually half Jewish or half Israelite? Look, it's not a weird stretch, given the fact that the next great patriarch we read about, Moses, does the same thing. He marries the daughter of a priest of Midian. So these aren't just heathens. These aren't just non-Israelites. These are people whose families are engaged in the worship, leadership in the worship of these other gods. This is marrying, you know, the modern equivalent would be marrying the reverend's daughter, you know, marrying the pastor's daughter. So this is what these guys do. This is what Joseph and Moses do. They marry the daughter of a priest. So rabbis don't like that. They want us not to be Hebrew. But there's some backstory on her as well, which we actually read about a couple weeks ago. But we'll read it again.
Can somebody else read for a minute?
Volunteers? It's up there. Oh, Snot.
I can read if you want.
Okay, thank you, Diane.
Are we at the,
Snot had saved Joseph's life.
okay. Snot had saved Joseph's life while she was still an infant in arms. When Joseph was accused of immoral conduct by Potiphar's wife and the other women, and his master was on the point of having him hanged, Asnat approached her foster father, and she assured him under oath that the charge against Joseph was false. Then spoke God, as you live, because you did try to defend Joseph, you shall be the woman to bear the tribes that he is appointed to beget.
Yep. And so because Ephraim and Manasseh are going to be tribes of their own, this is a pretty big deal. So again, we have this midrash that she defended Joseph to Potiphar and to her foster parents when she was in their home. So that's a little backstory of what would have happened if she was there. So she was just a child, she was a baby, but yet she spoke out. And because of that miracle, it was pretty clear that Joseph was innocent, because this baby shouldn't have been able to speak like that. And she does it. So what actually happens when she has these kids?
Asnat bore him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, during the 7 years of plenty. For in the time of famine, Joseph refrained from all indulgence in the pleasures of life. They were bred in chastity and fear of God by their father, and they were wise and well instructed in all knowledge and in the affairs of state, so that they became the favorites of the court and were educated with the royal princes.
Okay, so that tells us a little bit about Ephraim and Manasseh. We don't get anything in the Torah about their lives as children. So according to this, they're born during the years of plenty. So they're born in the first 7 years. They're not born in the second set of years. And why? Because the Midrash tells us that Joseph did not have sex during the 7 years of famine. He didn't indulge in the pleasures of life, which is an interesting, kind of question. Why? Why did he? I mean, this is a guy who essentially may have not been unfamiliar with celibacy, considering that he spent the years of 17, 18 to 30 as a slave and in prison. It might not have been as hard for him to do that, but it still is interesting that Joseph, the rabbis interpret Joseph not having sex during the time of famine, which again, they're trying to give us a little bit of background about Ephraim and Manasseh in that. But I think, again, one of the interesting pieces of this is that Ephraim and Manasseh get raised like good Egyptians, because according to this, they were favorites of the court and they were educated with royal princes, which means they were not educated in the Hebrew way, if you will. They're educated as Egyptians. And I've always kind of felt that probably that would have been true, that Manasseh and Ephraim, these two tribes, these two Israelites that are essentially elevated to the level of their uncles, right? Because they become two of the tribes in the tribal portions that we get when we come into the land of Canaan, that these two people, our ancestors, Ephraim and Manasseh, were basically raised as Egyptians. They were not raised as Israelites. They were not raised in that culture. They didn't have family around them. They had their father and their mother, maybe, but they didn't have that. By the way, if their mother was in fact Egyptian, and their grandfather was a priest of On, the assumption would have been too that they knew Egyptian culture and religion really, really well. Really well. So think about what their life was like as opposed to their uncles and their cousins that have been in Canaan for the last 20 years, or by the time they come down there, about 25 years, what their life was like as opposed to their cousins. Could they have even related to their cousins, these Egyptian princes, if you will? It's an interesting image to think about when they get reunited finally, when the family comes down and Manasseh and Ephraim look at their country bumpkin family from Canaan, shepherds, nomads, people who live in tents coming into their midst. You wonder what they thought when they saw these people. What did they think when they saw their cousins and their uncles from Canaan, these Egyptian princes? And again, it says that they were wise and well instructed and knew the Egyptian way of life. But one could imagine that they weren't that impressed with their family from the other side, you know? So keep that in mind.
Wouldn't their offspring have become slaves?
Yeah. And doesn't it make that tragic fall even more profound? These kids who got raised in the court of Pharaoh, that their kids, their family, their grandkids are slaves the same as everybody else. I mean, let's think about it. Joshua is from the tribe of Ephraim. He's Moses' assistant, right? He's the one who carries off after Moses dies. It's Joshua. Joshua is one of those people that's raised, assumedly, again, a grandson of Ephraim is a slave. I mean, there's great midrash about Joshua and how he lived and, you know, what roles he had as an Egyptian slave. But and of course, he's played by John Derrick in the Ten Commandments. But Joshua, I mean, yeah, these are people who, when it comes time for slave times, their prestige wouldn't have counted for a whole lot, assumedly. And again, it's really, really a powerful midrash. It's not a powerful midrash. I mean, we don't have that midrash. We don't have those conversations. I mean, we can imagine them. We can make our own midrash on what their discussions with their cousins were like when they first came there. But what were Ephraim and Manasseh's sons, and how were they looked at by the other Israelites when they were slaves? You know,
Are there any midrash?
No, we don't. We don't have it. I mean, we don't. But the interesting thing is, we have midrash on Joshua, but we don't have the midrash on that conversation, on what happens when they fall. And to me, it's a really, really powerful image because it's really, really, really relevant, and it's very powerful in its truth and how it happened in our own day. I mean, in our own life, some of us in our own lifetime, this story played out. The story of Ephraim and Manasseh, who were raised in the court of Pharaoh at the height of their society and culture. When you look at what happened to wealthy Austrian and German Jews who wound up in the same concentration camps as the poor Ostjuden of Poland, who they looked at like they wouldn't have had them even come into their homes as a servant. They wound up in the same camps 75 years ago. This happened. These Ephraim and these modern day Ephraim and Manasseh, these people who, you know, spoke German, who in many cases didn't want to have anything to do with their Jewish ancestry or their Jewish families or their Jewish culture, they wound up in the same concentration camps and in the same, unfortunately, in many cases, the same ovens as those other people. It's a crazy story. it's a crazy story that's been repeated throughout history, throughout the last 3,000 years of Jewish history. These people who thought that their culture and that their wealth would protect them, when it came time for the wall, for the floor to fall out and for the walls to cave in, didn't stop them. So again, we'd like to think that maybe Manasseh and Ephraim are better than that. That they're, the rabbis try to envision that they are raised by a father who teaches them not to give in to the culture or the wider culture. But let's play that story out to its logical conclusion, which is it would have been real hard for them to have much in common with their family. The rabbis just gave you that. They just tipped it off because they said they were educated with the royal princes. They had more in common with the royal princes than they did with their own family. So it's a powerful story. It's a powerful, and again, unfortunately, the story's been told too many times. And by the way, again, the thing that goes on in the back of our minds sometimes, and in our darkest moments of what if, that's the story that you just saw demonstrated or displayed in Philip Roth's could have happened here.
Mm-hmm.
Could those people, myself included, who love American culture and who have, probably arguably more in common with, people who are, my neighbors rather than necessarily the people who live in a Jewish enclave of, Lakewood, New Jersey, or Kiryas Joel, what would happen? And that's the fear, that's the unspoken, oftentimes, fear that this could happen, and all of our cultural assimilation would mean nothing. So, Ephraim and Manasseh, yeah. Let's imagine and write some good midrash there for ourselves. All right, here we go.
Before the famine broke over the land, Joseph found an opportunity of rendering the king a great service. He equipped an army of 4,600 men, providing all the soldiers with shields and spears and bucklers and helmets and slings. With this army, and aided by the servants and officers of the king and by the people of Egypt, he carried on a war with Tarshish in the first year after his appointment as viceroy. The people of Tarshish had invaded the territory of the Ishmaelites, and the latter, few in number at that time, were sore pressed and applied to the king of Egypt for help against their enemies. At the head of his host of heroes, Joseph marched to the land of Havilah, where he was joined by the Ishmaelites, and with united forces they fought against the people of Tarshish, routed them utterly, settled their land with the Ishmaelites, while the defeated men took refuge with their brethren in Yavan. Joseph and his army returned to Egypt, and not a man had they lost.
Yep. So what does Joseph do? He doesn't just help them with internal domestic policy. He also helps them in foreign policy. So he creates an army that he goes to war against the people of Tarshish, which we assume what they're talking about here are Phoenicians, which isn't beyond the realm of it isn't beyond the realm of possibility that the Egyptians and those types of people would go to war against each other, because we actually have Egyptian records of their going to war against Greek type peoples. And so where it says that they took refuge with their brethren in Yavan are the Greeks. It's the Hebrew version of the word Ionia. So it's the proto, before there's Athens and the Greek city states like Sparta and those Mycenae. Before that, there's Yavon, there's Ionia, and the connection they have to the Philistines. So this is a story of Joseph defending his new homeland, Egypt, against those people. And again, the Ishmaelites, who are Arabs, they are allies. And of course, we know that Hagar is an Ishmaelite, or is Egyptian, and is the ancestor of the Ishmaelites. So there's a connection there between the Egyptians and the Arabs. Of course, Egypt today is primarily Arab, but at the time that the Midrash was written, it wasn't. So it ends up kind of being even more true in the sense that the Ishmaelites they control Egypt and most of the Middle East as Arabs. All right.
What was Egypt besides Arab?
Well, remember, it wasn't Arab until the time of Muhammad. So up until that time, the question of what Egypt looked like is, well, we have pictures because we have these beautiful sarcophagi that the Egyptians, we would call them probably Coptic. That's what most people call them. It's probably not the best description for them, but they were a combination of probably looked still what they looked like during the Pharaoh's time, and they were probably a mixture of Greek and Arab and Jewish, because according to our history and the history that we have from Egypt at the time, there were hundreds of thousands of Jews that lived in Alexandria and Egypt during the time of Jesus and during the first century. So a good mixture of Mediterranean type peoples. And again, they probably spoke more Greek than they did any other language at the time that the rabbis are writing this. But that's because of Greeks taking control during Alexander the Great's time, not this that they projected back even further back to when the Greeks were not powerful yet. So, which is true. The Greeks were not as powerful then in the time of this Pharaoh, of these pharaohs. So again, keep that in mind that rabbis knew maybe not necessarily everything about history that we do today, but they knew enough to know that this would have made sense, or that story could have played out. So let's keep going.
In a little while, Joseph's prophecy was confirmed. That year and the 6 following years were years of plenty, as he had foretold. The harvest was so ample that a single ear produced 2 heaps of grain. And Joseph made circumspect arrangements to provide abundantly for the years of famine. He gathered up all the grain, and in the cities situated in the middle of each district, he laid up the produce from round about, and had ashes and earth strewn on the garnered food from the very soil on which it had been grown. Also, he preserved the grain in the ear, all these being precautions taken to guard against rot and mildew.
So it shows that Joseph also knew how to save up the food. And so these were precautions that he took so that the food could be stored properly. Rot and mildew, they had obviously the same issues that we do, and even more so because they didn't have refrigeration and they didn't have the ability to seal things off very well. But those are some of the things that they did. So it tells you that allowing the corn to stay on the ear would allow it to be preserved without rotting. Indian corn. Interesting. Yep.
The inhabitants of Egypt also tried on their own account to put aside a portion of the superabundant harvest of the 7 fruitful years against the need of the future. But when the grievous time of dearth came, and they went to their storehouses to bring forth the treasured grain, behold, it had rotted and become unfit for food. The famine broke in upon the people with such suddenness that the bread gave out unexpectedly as they sat at their tables, They had not even a bite of bran bread.
Okay. So what's
They had not even a bite of bran bread. There you
Yeah.
go.
So what just happened? What did the rabbis just do? They just answered a question that most of you never even had. But you should. You could have had this question before. So we know what Joseph does, right? Joseph tells the people, he tells Pharaoh, we have to store up food for the famine, right? If we don't, our country is going to go to hell. If we don't save this up, we don't save this food up. And so he puts into process this saving of food during the good years. And then again, the savings will allow it. So first of all, how do you save food for 7 years, right? It's not easy. You can't do it and know that the food is going to last 7 years. Well, the important thing is that as you're storing up the food, you're not necessarily storing up just for the 7 years. You start using it, in those first 7 years too. The last year, is you're moving forward. You're not, you're spending in the future, you're spending stuff for the future. You're constantly saving up. But here's the issue. This is where the rabbis, again, just answered a question that many of you maybe never had. So first of all, saving and storing it effectively is a whole nother thing. So they say, and because Joseph knew how to do that too, that's something that the other people didn't have, which gets us to this other issue, which is it says that Joseph, because of what he did, the Pharaoh had all this food and everybody came to the Pharaoh for food. Now, people are saying, but didn't the average person have their own grain silo? You didn't have to go to Pharaoh to get food. You save it up yourself. Not only that, everybody would have known what Joseph knew now. Once Joseph told everybody Pharaoh's plan, everybody could have done it. Nah. The rabbis just answered this question in a weird way, which is that everybody else who tried to store up food failed. That's why everybody had to come to Pharaoh. Not everybody could do it. He was the only one he's the only person who was able to do it. Nobody else could do it, which meant everybody had to come to Pharaoh to get food. Not just people from other countries, but even people from Egypt had to come and get food. And that is the story also of what happens here. And it is in the Torah. That section is actually there. And I'll show you why it's important. It says, he gathered all the grain of the 7 years that the land of Egypt was enjoying, and he stored it in the grain in the cities. He put in each city the grain of the fields around it. And Joseph collected produce in very large quantity, like the sands of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it cannot be measured. And then it says, before the years of famine came, Joseph became the father of 2 sons. Right? So it says, what did he name his sons, by the way? We'll get to this in the Midrash. I don't know if today, but we will get to it. Joseph named Manasseh, God has made me forget my hardship and my parental home. Wow. He made me forget my hardship, but all of the house of my father. That's not just my hardship. It says my hardship, but it also says all the things that happened in my father's house. The second one, Ephraim, God has made me fertile in the land of my affliction. So it says the 7 years of abundance of the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine set in, just as Joseph had foretold. There was famine in all the lands, but throughout the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt felt the hunger, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to the Egyptians, go to Joseph, whatever he tells you, you shall do. Accordingly, when the famine became severe in the land of Egypt, Joseph laid open all that was within and rationed out grain to the Egyptians. The famine, however, spread over the world. So all the world came to Egypt to procure rations, for the famine had become severe. I want to show you one other thing. This is where Joseph's brothers come down and get bread. There's something I was trying to show to you. I'll show you later. And that is right here. It says that the people cried out to Joseph for bread because all the land of Egypt felt the hunger. Right? So it meant that Egyptians, for whatever reason, there was bread. Throughout the land of Egypt, there was bread. But when all the land of Egypt felt the hunger, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to the Egyptians, go to Joseph. Right? So what happened clearly was the Egyptians knew that there would be bread, that they could have bread, that they could save up. But something happened that they still felt the hunger. Which meant that the people, whatever happens, the people don't actually control the grain. That Joseph had taken control of the grain. So either, the way the rabbis tell it, all their other bread went bad. The point is that Pharaoh, and because he's in charge, Joseph actually has control of all the food stores. This would make Pharaoh and Joseph very powerful. Of course, it wouldn't make Joseph very popular with the people. And again, not to belabor the point, but man, doesn't that sound like every anti-Semitic charge throughout history, which is that Jews control food. Jews control power sources. Jews control money. Joseph, by way of Pharaoh's the one who's got it, but Joseph's the one who did it. That Joseph winds up with the power over all the food of the country. Again, would not make him very popular. So let's see what happens.
Thus they were driven to apply to Joseph and beseech his help. And he admonished them, saying, give up your allegiance to your deceitful idols, and say, blessed is he who gives bread to all flesh. But they refused to deny their lying gods, and they betook themselves to Pharaoh, only to be told by him, go to Joseph. What he says to you, do. For this Pharaoh was rewarded. God granted him a long life and a long reign until he became arrogant, and well-merited punishment overtook him.
Wow. So what the rabbis just did is they interpreted, go to Joseph and do what he says to you, is that Joseph started telling the people, you have to stop worshiping your Egyptian gods in order to get the food. There is no sense.
It's like a rescue mission.
Yeah, there's exactly. You want food?
We'll give you food, but first we're going to have these prayers.
First we're going to baptize you. Yeah, that's a weird. There is nothing in there to hint that that's what actually happened. But the rabbis want to tell us that Joseph, number one, wanted, in his weird way, of course, to help everybody by making them give up their false gods. So he's not doing anything bad, but he's not doing anything that would endear him to the people. And Joseph is aided in this by the Pharaoh, who basically says, yeah, do what Joseph says. Well, the Bible says, do what Joseph says. The rabbis want to know, or they ask the question, what did Joseph say? What did Joseph say? Well, he told them, better get right with God. So here's this wonderful midrash that Joseph, as Reverend Lynn, thank you, Reverend Lynn, for saying, was a proto-missionary, which is you want the food, get down on your knees. And so this is a very strange midrash, which the rabbis have no issue laying down. They also know the consequences of this, which is the Egyptians they don't like it. So here's what happens.
When the Egyptians approached Joseph with the petition for bread, he spoke, saying, I give no food to the uncircumcised. Go hence and circumcise yourselves, and then return hither. They entered the presence of Pharaoh and complained to him regarding Joseph, but he said as before, Go unto Joseph. And they replied, We come from Joseph, and he has spoken roughly to us, saying, Go hence and circumcise yourselves. We warned you in the beginning that he is a Hebrew and would treat us in such wise. Pharaoh said to them, You fools, did he not prophesy through the Holy Spirit and proclaim to the whole world that there would come 7 years of plenty to be followed by 7 years of dearth? Why did you not save the yield of 1 or 2 years against the day of your need? Weeping, they made reply. The grain that we put aside during the good years has rotted. Pharaoh, have you nothing over the flour of yesterday? The Egyptians, the very bread in the basket rotted. Pharaoh, why? The Egyptians, because Joseph willed thus. Pharaoh, you fools, if his word has power over the grain, making it to rot when he desires it to rot, then also must we die. If so be his wish concerning us, go therefore to him and do as he bids you.
Yep. Now, none of you probably realize there was a Midrash that has Joseph do this. Again, I don't want to say that this is blaming the victim, but there is a sense here that Joseph did not do much to further the cause of the Hebrews in the land of Egypt. He basically just told everybody, go get circumcised if you want any food, which is even tougher than getting, in all fairness, a baptism. I do want to say that this is very strange because there doesn't seem to be anything in Joseph's story, Joseph's character, that would have turned him into this, this kind of attitude. But
no, he's a little holier than thou.
Yes, but the fact that he's preaching to the people, he's almost forcibly converting them. And that the Pharaoh, first of all, goes along with it and basically says, what can we do? I mean, if this guy can do this kind of stuff, we got to do what he says. But you can imagine, I mean, the Pharaoh's power system was built on he's been chosen by the gods. He's a god in his own right. He's undermining the whole system. Pharaoh has to undermine the whole system if he's going to allow Joseph to do what Joseph says he's going to do, which is you got to pray in order to get the food. It undermines the whole system that the Egyptians have been working under. So it's a very strange thing that Pharaoh would comply and that Joseph would be given this role. Given the fact that Joseph, at every instance we see, doesn't seem to really be into his family, and has just named one of his kids, I forgot everything about where I came from. It seems like Joseph is pretty assimilated.
But he knows God helped him.
Yeah, but the rabbis imagine that in the face of all this assimilation, all this turning his back on his old ways, that he's never given up his faith. They love this idea that people can assimilate completely, but never when it comes to their faith, and that they would never give up their faith. It's so weird because it really is counter to almost everything that we've seen. Every time we've seen these people historically, these Jews that assimilated, they went the whole 9 yards. I mean, it was done. They were not worshiping, they were not Jewish anymore, if you will. But yet there was this kind of hope that people would do what Joseph did, what Daniel does, which is not give up, your faith, even as you're becoming, completely subsumed by everything else, even as you're wearing these clothes and you're raising your kids Egyptian, that you never gave up your faith. And, even more so, are trying to get everybody to come over, to your side. I really believe
but
this.
It seems to me that when Joseph and Pharaoh are talking, they're talking about the same God, the same spirit. They don't seem to be at odds.
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. So it seems as though Pharaoh has gone over to the Jewish way, if you will, that he understands
Right.
that, and that the Pharaoh, buys into this. And by the way, that's a theme that you get even in the story in Moses's Pharaoh. A couple generations later,
Mhm.
that Moses's Pharaoh does get it too. He just can't do anything other than what he does. But he recognizes God's power. I mean, he's not stupid enough to know, to still maintain that this isn't God that's doing it. It's just he can't do anything other than do what he does. So this idea that the pharaohs somehow do understand, yeah, it is a theme that we get in this story and in the Moses story as well. But it's really strange that this kind of fantasy that these Jews would still be like clinging to their faith is a really interesting one, and it is I think it is a Jewish fantasy. It kind of begs the question. There's overwhelming, I would say overwhelming evidence that Columbus's family was Jewish. I mean, overwhelming evidence. Probably both of his parents were conversos. You almost have to argue against all the other information to come to that. The fact that they had fled to Italy, that his parents were Spanish, fled to Italy, like most of the conversos who wanted to get away from the Inquisition. But the fact is that Columbus doesn't seem to have had, even if he knew he had this Jewish ancestry, he doesn't seem to have any issue with being very, very Catholic, and of course making everybody else very Catholic. I think, and we don't know what Jews of the time really said about Columbus. We don't have records. We don't have records of Columbus's contemporaries saying anything about Columbus's Judaism. But this fantasy that because Columbus was Jewish, that he somehow was secretly going to bring Judaism to the New World, it never happened. I mean, quite the contrary. The exact opposite happened. So, or not the exact opposite, but he was pretty violently making sure that people would accept, Christianity when he came here. But this acceptance of or even if we say that Columbus was of Jewish ancestry, it didn't mean anything from the standpoint of him promoting Judaism. So that's a kind
Is
of
this an anxiety on the part of the rabbis?
I really do think it is. I think it is the reality of knowing what normally happened when the court Jew what he really did, which was he didn't practice Judaism anymore. I mean, again, the modern equivalent is Kissinger, who never did anything Jewish throughout his life. The idea that somehow, he would advocate on behalf of Israel. I mean, what we have from what we know from 73, he made Israel grovel for supplies during the Yom Kippur War. It didn't seem like his Judaism affected. He seems maybe in more recent years to have had a little bit more pro-Israel attitude, but man, that guy really did believe in America, and he really believed in American supremacy, and really did not use his Judaism, did not inform his treatment of Israel. It doesn't seem in any way. He always seemed to put America first in foreign policy, and he was, whatever you want to say about him, he was effective. He was effective at doing that. The hope that somehow this Jew in the White House would help Israel, it didn't happen. I want to tell you the
It was
reality.
like a Catholic in the White House didn't help the Pope.
No. This theory that
But
somehow.
you know what this reminds me of? Shiver Singer's The Slave, which is one of my favorite stories. Isaac Bashever Singer,
Yeah, Bashever Singer,
The
yeah.
Slave.
Yeah.
Right.
Because this motif, and Singer obviously was steeped in Midrash. I mean, even more than Torah, he was steeped in Midrash. He loved Midrash, and this motif goes throughout Jewish history, and the Midrash does give us, is exactly what you said, this anxiety, this fear that even with being in the corridors of power, it doesn't matter. They wanted it to, but it didn't, and it didn't bode well for the Jewish community necessarily to have that person in the court. The Mordechai story is the exception to the rule, and it's actually interesting because the the story actually articulates it, because when Mordecai says to Esther, because Esther says, what am I supposed to do? Mordecai says, if you don't do it, somebody else will. There'll be a miracle, but don't think that you can get away with not doing anything. This is the fear that Mordecai articulates. It's in the Bible. It's the Bible actually says this anxiety of what happens if you don't do anything, and the fact that we're not sure that Esther is going to do anything. I mean, she does, and she's heroic, and I don't want to take away from Esther, but there's the moment of Mordecai saying to her, what are you going to do? And it's that reality of what, well, wait a second, she's the queen and she can't do anything. That's the anxiety. It is articulated in the Bible, not just in the Midrash, but it's definitely here. And again, it sets up a little bit more in the Midrash why the Egyptians didn't like Joseph, and by extension, maybe we're not really wild about the Jewish people because of this experience of feeling powerless to them. And again, I'm not going to belabor it, but you're hearing it a lot today, and you'll hear it, unfortunately. It's part of the anti-Semitic. It's part of it's the built-in part of anti-Semitism, which is Jews are in power. They're causing this, and they're the ones who are they're the ones who control the banks, and they're the ones who are creating. They created coronavirus, and it's this. This will never go away. Unfortunately, it'll never go away. And the best we can hope is that
it's the Chinese Jews who've done that. Chinese Jews have done the coronavirus, right?
They've done the coronavirus.
That's right.
I mean, it is
all 20 of them.
It is literal. Well, yes, but I will tell you that it is. I mean, look. In reality, the Chinese are actually being, of course, now being part of the blame for this. But Jews are being blamed for it here in this country, and as strange as it is, and as much as we want to laugh about it, because it's so ridiculous, and thankfully these people are marginalized; they're not in power. What if they were? What if they were? What if they did have power? And what if the consequence was you could attack Jews for no reason? I mean, with no punishment for these kinds of things, and that's what happened during the Black Death. We had complete Jewish communities after the Crusades that were wiped out during the Black Plague because not enough Jews were dying, or because you had to kill somebody. And there were throughout Germany there were Jewish communities that disappeared overnight, and some of them, there weren't hundreds of people. There were a few dozen, but those few dozen died because the Black Plague was frightening, and people didn't know who else to blame. Couldn't blame rats and fleas because they couldn't see the plague, but couldn't see the bacteria. Anyways, this is the fear. And we talk about anxiety. It's real. So again, on a happier note, we don't live in those times, and we're like everybody else dealing with this, and we did during the Black Plague too. But we'll hopefully be together and stay strong. So everybody, be careful and be healthy and celebrate. It is a beautiful day outside today, so hopefully get some fresh air too, everybody. And we'll see you soon. Take care. Good to see everybody today.